Good afternoon. My name is Connie Butler. I'm the Chief Curator of the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and I'm joined by my colleague, Michael Darling, and we are here to introduce some really exciting guests today as part of a studio visit with Andrea Bowers. Michael and I have been working on an exhibition of Andrea's work together for the last couple of years. The show will debut in Chicago in February of 2021 and then come to Los Angeles in May and run through the summer. I think I can speak for Michael a little bit when I say that for both of us, Andrea is an artist who comes from deep within our both of our pasts here in Los Angeles. We have both known Andrea as an artist and a colleague and friend for nearly 30 years, actually. And though Andrea is born in Ohio, she, I think, is absolutely one of our most important artists here in Los Angeles, and we really consider her a kind of towering figure in this community. So we're really excited about the exhibition, which will cover almost 25 years of work. It's a survey exhibition of Andrea's work, and for me, she's one of the artists who is really at the forefront of representing what I think of as sort of the legacies of feminist art and 70s feminist art practice. And in particular, the very important, maybe the most influential kind of impulse that comes out of that history, which is collaboration and activism and community-based social practice. Andrea, I think, is best known at this point for the work that she does deeply embedded with communities from feminist communities, immigrant communities, Native American activist communities, which we're going to hear about specifically today. And this has become part of her, I would say, the kind of foundational part of her work as a storyteller. I think of her really as a great storyteller of our time. She also happens to make very beautiful objects, many of which will be part of our exhibition at the Hammer and at the MCA. But we wanted today to focus on this kind of activist and social practice aspect of Andrea's work because it's particularly relevant to this current moment. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael to introduce our really wonderful guests.
Thanks, Connie. And yes, one of the things that's exciting about today is that Connie and I have been in the studio watching artworks develop over the years. But before Andrea even puts pen to paper or pencil to paper, paintbrush to cardboard, there's a lot of research that goes on. There's work with activists, there's work with scholars and thinkers. And then she tries to figure out how her art could help move along the initiatives and the interests and the concerns of those activists. And so today we get to peek behind the scenes of that work, that pre-work, that preparation, as Andrea talks with Dr. Kaitlin Reed. Dr. Kaitlin Reed is an assistant professor of Native American Studies at Humboldt State University. Her research is focused on tribal land and water rights, extractive capitalism, and settler colonial political economies. Her current book project connects the dots between the gold rush and the green rush, focusing on resource extraction and violence against indigenous lands and bodies. Dr. Reed is an enrolled member of the Yurok tribe in Northwestern California. And we're also really excited that we have a special guest today, which is Toka Ironize, the great activist who happens to be staying with Andrea right now. And so I will turn it over to Andrea and Dr. Reed and to Toka. Thank you all for being here.
Here we go. Hi, everyone. I'm outside here with Toka, and this is Toka Ironize, the amazing activist and beautiful person who's currently going to school at, where are you going to school?
Bard College at Simon's Rock.
So we're all taking and teaching a lot of classes here right now.
This is true.
Let's see. So there will be a piece in the show about Toka that Toka and myself and our friend Tina, who's also here, and Lindsay, we drove, and Josh.
Yes, and Josh.
We asked Toka to take us to her 5 most sacred spaces, places in South Dakota. And then she just spoke about those locations and the ideas that came to her head. And we, with Tina's beautiful
Camera work.
photography,
Yeah.
she was the director of photography, and Lindsay's amazing editing. Toka told these beautiful stories, and so that will be in the show. And Toka just happened to be here. So recently I was up in Northern California in an area called Trinidad, because there are a group of tree sitters up there called the Redwood Forest Defenders, and I was documenting their actions. They're fighting against a company called Green Diamond, who's doing large sections of clear cutting. And I knew that this was going on during coronavirus, and I just wanted to, just document some of what they were doing, just sort of bear witness to it. And in fact, I found out today from one of the activists that Green Diamond has, as of yesterday, began clear cutting again. So it's a really intense time, and I'm, very concerned for them. And the thing that's really frustrating about Green Diamond, and perhaps Kaitlin can even talk about them more than I can, is that they're, one of the things they make is toilet paper. So it was like devastating to be up there and see huge swaths of land clear cut. It's like greenwashing, that this company does. They act as if they're not clear cutting, so they'll save like one tree in acres of land. And they'll mark it with a W. They'll spray paint a W on it that means wildlife, and they've saved one tree. So they're back at it again. And we're both actually considering going up maybe.
Yeah, maybe visiting.
To visit. But while I was up there, a friend of mine, an artist, an activist named Katie Holton, sent me a kind of, I don't know, Kaitlin, a webinar kind of class by Kaitlin. And I took it, and it was about the white supremacy embedded in American environmentalism. And for me, I feel like my education has been the education of the powerful. And so I feel like I have to spend the rest of my life relearning everything I was taught. And Kaitlin's presentation blew me away. And I just wanted the opportunity for all of us to hear her incredibly powerful research. So I hope I've said enough, but I'm a little nervous because I want to take a lot of notes because I'm learning. So let's hand it over to Kaitlin.
Thank you guys very much for having me. Thank you very much, Andrea. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm going to throw a lot of info at you in the next 15 minutes. And so if you don't feel like an expert on settler colonial ecologies in 15 minutes, that's okay. I'm happy to break it down in the Q&A. So I decided to call this 15-minute deep dive. The world is on fire, indigenous and settler colonial ecologies. And so essentially, my work, my research focuses on settler colonial political ecologies and indigenous environmental justice. And so I'm basically making the argument that we need to understand settler colonialism as an ecological phenomenon, and that we can't keep thinking about indigenous methods of stewarding our ecosystems as a backup plan, or as oh, that's interesting, right? But we're gonna keep clear cutting forest, right? And so the first thing we need to talk about is whose land we're on, right? Andrea, what you said a moment ago about having to unlearn, right? All of these things you've been taught, right? There's a reason they drill into your head manifest destiny in 3rd grade, and then in 4th grade, and then in 5th grade, right? If we gave an accurate history of how the United States is predicated on genocide and slavery and land theft, it'd be really weird to stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance every single morning, right? And so indigenous scholars like Leanne Simpson is an excellent one. She wrote this piece called Land as Pedagogy. She thinks about the way K-12 institutions, their primary goal is not to create critical thinkers. It's to create another population of people willing to uphold settler colonialism, right? Stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And it's most advantageous, right, if these people do not know that their country is predicated on land theft. left. And so the first thing we all need to do is learn whose land we're on. So I'm here in McKinleyville, California. I teach and work at Humboldt State University in Arcata, California, and I am on the territory of the Wiyot people. And so whenever I get invited to go give a talk, I always begin with a land acknowledgement, and then I'll tell you why land acknowledgements are done. I begin by acknowledging that I am on the land of the Wiyot peoples, which includes the Wiyot tribe, Bear River Rancheria, and Blue Lake Rancheria. Arcata is known as Gudini, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. The persistence of Wiyot peoples to remain in relationship with these lands, despite their attempted genocide, compels me to spread awareness to my inner and extended community regarding the true history of this space. I strive to hold myself and others accountable for the continuation of colonial acts, which neglect to include the voices and needs of these tribes while remembering to lead with compassion. This is a land acknowledgement that one of our graduate students, Carrie Tully, wrote. After I read land acknowledgements, I tell you why they are not enough. Dr. Hayden King, he's an Anishinaabe scholar at Ryerson University, and his university came to him and they're like, Hayden, please write a land acknowledgement so that our Office of Diversity and Inclusion can have it on the books and it can just be a standard practice, right? And then he did an interview about why he regrets doing that, because they're now in vogue, right? We hear them all the time. The idea is that like, that's all you need to do, right? Land acknowledgements need to be your first step in understanding and learning whose land you're on. They are not your end course of action. And so what I would like you to go do is, one, find out whose land you're on. If you don't know, you can go to native-land.ca, type in your address, it'll tell you exactly whose territory you're on. The other thing we need to talk about in the context of land acknowledgements is if they don't compel you to do something, they're useless, right? So I'm going to have a link be thrown into the chat right now. It is the Karuk Tribe Eco Revitalization Fund. This is funds to help the Karuk Tribe continue to exercise fire management in Northern California, which, as I'll talk about, right, California is on fire. And so if you feel compelled to do something today, you can check out that link or go do some research on whose land you're on and what way you can help those people. All right, let's get started. The first thing I need to tell you is that the New World is in fact a very old world, right? I hear New World all the time, like whether I'm like at a winery and people are giving me like a new age, New World wine. The concept of New World completely erases millennia of Native history and presence and knowledge about these places. My textbook in my high school history class, the first chapter was called Pre-Columbian History, right? Like for some reason, history doesn't begin until Europeans show up, right? But what this works to do is perpetuate a stereotype that Native people are primitive, that we're savage, that we're these nomadic hunter-gatherers that are just walking around grabbing a berry from this bush and grabbing a berry from that bush. Right? This works to erase complex ecological management regimes that Native people have developed over millennia, right? So I'm going to talk specifically about the context of California. California Indians, we lit California on fire all the time, right? We figured out very early on that if you don't burn, fuels build up and you get catastrophic wildfires. We've also discovered that fire helps create meadows where game would come and it makes hunting a lot easier, right? Fire keeps all the grubs out of the acorns. Fire makes all of our basketry materials grow back stronger and more dense, right? And so we have been burning California for thousands and thousands of years, right? When the Spanish mission system shows up in the 1700s, one of the very first things they write in all of their diaries and their journals is WTF, why are these stupid Indians lighting everything on fire? Right? They didn't understand the complexity of our land management regimes, right? And so they passed fire suppression policies. State of California created in 1850, they passed it in their genocide bill, like the bill that like sets up a system of Indian slavery and like creates the militia system, right? There's also a clause in there to suppress all fire, right? And then you get the Forest Service in 1910. And what do they want? They want timber, right? So they're not thinking about the forest as this interconnected complex system where you can get all of your sustenance from this ecology, right? You isolate a single species, which has been considered profitable, right? Timber, and so you suppress fire, you get Smokey Bear in the 1940s, right? And now we have catastrophic wildfires. And so I will return to fire, but I wanted to start off by telling you that this myth about Native people that you've been given your whole life, that we're these primitive hunter-gatherers, that we don't have roots or like societies, right? That is not true. That is used as a justification for our dispossession. Okay. And so land is really important to us. That's what this quote essentially means. We have different ways of conceiving and understanding land ideologically, right? And so land is important to us materially and metaphorically, because we are inextricably linked to our land bases. So the importance of our land stretches far beyond its role as space on which human activity takes place. For Natives, it is a significant source of literal and figurative power. Within Native studies, land has been theorized as the living entity that enables Indigenous life. So in short, it all comes back to the issue of land, right? Another way of thinking about this is put by Oren Lyons, the faith keeper of the Onondaga. What you people call your natural resources, our people call our relatives. This is very important to think about because natural resources have to be ideologically or socially constructed. Vandana Shiva is an excellent scholar. She's from India and she has written extensively on the creation of natural resources, right? Resource comes from a Latin word that originally implied life, a reciprocal relationship between humans and nature that didn't ideologically dissociate them. But with the advent of colonialism, you have the construct of natural resources. These are the parts of nature that require development so that they can become profitable, right? This creates a dualism between human beings and nature, wherein humans are no longer part of, right, but something that gets to control or determine, right, rather than being interconnected. One of the things I think is really funny about like settler colonial nonsense is that human beings think they get to decide what environmental law is. Like that's really like so absurd to me because ecosystems have their own laws and natural order about what you can and cannot do in that ecosystem. So for example, I'm from the Yurok tribe. Our people are from the Klamath River. When you take a bunch of water out of the Klamath River, you get the largest fish kill in American history, right? Like human beings don't get to decide what environmental laws are because our laws aren't natural, right? Ecosystems collapse when we follow the laws of humans. Okay, so I need to segue into settler colonialism and I'm gonna go quick because I realize I'm starting to run out of time. So you probably learned about imperialism at some point in your education, right? Colonialism, exploitation colonialism, think like Berlin Conference, 1800s, right? Kind of partitioning up of Africa, going there, grabbing your stuff, coming home, right? The idea isn't to like set up a new home, it's to like go extract wealth and bring it back, right? Settler colonialism, on the other hand, is about land, not about labor. And so Indigenous peoples are replaced by settlers, erased through genocide, assimilation. Right? Settlers are here to stay and land itself is the profit. And the singular goal of the settler is the elimination of the native in order to gain access to land. Right? We could have an hour-long lecture on just what settler colonialism means, but I'm going to give you the fast and dirty version and we're going to keep going. People tell me, oh, Kaitlin, I never learned about settler colonialism in school. And I say, yes, you did. They just didn't call it that. This is what they called it, right? I'm sure all of you can recite off the top of your head what this is, right? God-given right to land. They tell you this when you're very, very young, and they tell you it over and over and over, and they make you write it on a test, right? Does anyone have any proof of this? Like the transcripts where God said settlers can have all this, the text conversation, like a video recording? Of course not, because it's made up. It's not real, right? It's coined in 1839. You can take a screenshot of this quote if you want. I'm gonna move on because I want to talk about fire. So the most important concerns to settler colonialism are land, water, and resources. For number one, because settlers need to make Indigenous lands their new home and source of capital. And to do that, you need to perceive of land in this private property framework, right? This restricts relationships between human beings and land, from one to owner and property, or owner to real estate. And then other forms of relationships to land get marked as like pagan, they get marked as like savage, uncivilized, primitive, that sort of thing. Second reason, the disruption of indigenous relationships to land represents a profound violence. This violence is not contemporary with the arrival of the settler, but must be reasserted each day of occupation. This violence is important, right? Because we can think about material violence, right? Like when we're talking about indigenous land dispossession, their knowledge systems are predicated around that particular landscape, how you feed yourself, how you construct shelter, how you care for yourself medically, right? All of these things are very geographically specific and local. And so to remove Native people, it's like not like you can go to Safeway, right? And so you see a lot of material harm and violence that takes place. But additionally, like our religions are tied to particular land bases. Right, like we don't build a church wherever is convenient for human beings. Most of our sacred sites, they're actually really inconvenient to get to, and we don't get to decide where they are, right? And so it's also a cosmological violence. The second part of this second reason, right, it must be reasserted each day of occupation. This is getting at a very important argument made by Patrick Wolfe. He's an Australian anthropologist who has since passed, but he has made great contributions to the theory of settler colonialism. And what he argues is that settler colonialism is continuing and ongoing. It is a structure, not an event. It's like we think about it as like an event. Oh, it happened in 1492 and it's over. Actually, no, settler colonialism has to be re-perpetuated and reproduced every day. So every morning I wake up and Green Diamond owns the ancestral territory of the Yurok people, right? Settler colonialism is being reproduced. Every morning, Redwood National Park I wake up and they own the deeds to my ancestral territory, right? That's settler colonialism being reproduced. And what it is it's about elimination in order to get access to land. And so what I look at in my work is how ecological destruction, ecological contamination is what continues to do the eliminatory work of settler colonialism. So here's a chart. I'm going to go through it really quickly. Different forms of elimination, right? Like we know like sterilization and genocide, but also like cultural assimilation via boarding schools, representation, treaty status, etc. So I want to, and this is from J.M. Bacon's piece, Settler Colonialism as Eco-Social Structure. But I want to show you this table because I really like it. So here, Bacon is thinking about Wolfe's forms of settler colonial elimination, specifically through an ecological lens. And so my book is trying to expand on this work here. And so we see physical elimination occurring through the poisoning of our food and waters, the theft of our water, right? Like as Yurok, we're salmon people, like what happens when all of our salmon die, right? Cultural assimilation through the disruption of ecological knowledge, the imposition of Western ecological management regimes, right, as a political form of elimination, and then discursive erasure through the renaming and repurposing of our sacred sites, right? The fact that we call it Black Hills and not Pahasapa, right? And so why this is important is because we need to understand settler colonialism as an ecological phenomenon. If we understand the demographic transition that occurred during invasion, and we understand the complex ecological management regimes that Native peoples had throughout the continent, right? The genocide of Native peoples and the land theft of Native peoples constitutes an enormous, incalculable ecological transformation. The only way we wouldn't think about that as a massive ecological transformation is if we're not thinking about Indigenous people as being active managers of their ecosystems, right? And so I hear this phrase all the time. What is it? We got to turn back the ecological clock, right? My question is to what? To when this was a virgin, pristine, untouched wilderness? Because that never existed, right? Indigenous people have been stewarding these landscapes for millennia. And so I make the argument that if like we want to talk about environmentalism and we want to talk about ecological restoration, we necessarily need to talk about settler colonialism, the imposition of Western ecological management regimes, and land theft from Indigenous people. So let's talk about fire. As you guys all probably know, California is on fire, and we would burn California all the time. So here's 4 photographs. You can see a managed forest after a fire on the top. And then you can see an unmanaged forest that gets burned, right? It takes a lot of knowledge to figure out how to use fire management. You need to figure out where to burn, when to burn, how often to burn, at what intervals, how hot it should get, right? All of this is through experimentation. The other thing Native peoples often say is like, we don't just do fire management for human beings, right? When we would burn our landscapes every single year, every single season, all of the animals that live in our ecosystems learn the smell of smoke, when it's coming, they understand its schedule, they can identify different types of smoke, right? And then if we don't burn, they're not able to teach their young, right? And then like we see a ton of casualties, right? Let's see. And then this brings me to this, right? We have fire suppression policies throughout California, right? We have this, even the way like within a settler colonial framework, we call them firefighters, right? Like fire is something to be feared. It is something that is dangerous, right? Like our elders like liken fire to electricity. Like, yeah, it can hurt you, but like it does a lot of really important things and you need to respect the power that it has. And so I wanted to recommend Carrie Marie Norgaard's work. She just wrote a book called Salmon and Acorns Feed Our People. It's amazing. Anyways, one of her chapters, she talks about the link between fire suppression policies and settler colonial violence, right? First off, the reason we have fire suppression policies in California is because we didn't think Indians were smart enough to listen to them on how they manage their ecosystems, right? But when you can't burn the forest, you can't feed yourself from it, right? Our acorns need fire. To hunt game, we need fire. Like what doesn't need fire is timber and clear cutting, right? And so how we understand our like environmental objectives, right, is rooted in settler colonial orientations to land. Okay. I think I went a little bit over my 15 minutes, but I think I stayed pretty close. So I'll quit talking and now we can have a fun conversation. I'll go off screen share.
Kaitlin, that was incredible. I wanted, like Toka just asked me to, can you, what's the book that you're writing? And is it covering these subjects or slightly different subjects?
It's in progress. My manuscript is due a year from next month. So right now, the editors might change it. It's called From Gold Rush to Green Rush, the ecology of settler colonialism in Northern California. And so I call it tracing the historical and ecological dots from the gold rush in California, which if folks don't know, miners committed genocide. They don't teach that in California schools. So I have to teach all my college freshmen when they get into my classes, like, hey, yeah, your state is founded on genocide and slavery. And so then I go from gold rush to the timber rush. And so I've been working on that chapter last month, to fish rush, to the green rush. So right now I'm working on a chapter. It's called Back to Whose Land? Hippie environmentalism and cannabis, right? And thinking about the back to the land movement as a continuation of settler colonial dispossession. So, and then I try to draw a bunch of parallels between that like kind of extend through like gold to timber to fish to cannabis, thinking about land dispossession, Indian removal, water theft, also the creation of water rights, right? Within a Western private property framework. There's some other ones. Oh, like sexual violence, yeah, toxics, those sorts of things.
So do you want to ask, did you want to say something to her?
I mean, I just think that that's crazy, like the parallels, especially of like miners, right? Like a gold rush as the initiator, because I mean, I'm living on Pine Ridge reservation right now, so very close to the Black Hills. And right, also a lot of the, really devastating genocidal events there occurred because of Custer's discovery of gold in the Black Hills.
Right. And then also they found gold in Georgia in 1828. 2 years later, Indian Removal Act, Trail of Tears. Right. And so the ways in which and then also they're blowing up like sacred mountains to get at gold. Right. And so the way
actual grave sites to put pipelines through, right? So I don't know, it's really crazy, and I'm really glad to be here because I mean, just as a young Indigenous student, hearing these things from another Indigenous woman, or I'm not sure what your pronouns are, but yeah, it's just, it feels very affirming, and also like I've never heard like the idea, right, of environmentalism and the way that we know it, right, inherently being violent is something that like I've never heard that idea come into words. Like for me, I think it's something that I've always felt because I've been a part of these movements. Like I self-identify as a climate activist, right? So it's definitely like I've felt that for a really long time, and I've never had I think the verbiage to vocalize it. So that feels really nice. Yes.
Can I ask a question? Dr. Reed, that was incredible. I want to rewatch it because there was so much in that presentation. It was fantastic. Thank you. You know, I'm sitting here thinking about like the national park system, which is obviously part of the, the history that you're talking about. And, we're all focusing right now on, or many of us on presidential politics and just thinking like, oh, if we can just get a new person in there, we're going to reverse these environmental policies. We're going to be back on the road. It's going to be good. But obviously that's not correct. What kinds of very specific actions do you, unlearning and learning and listening, as Andrea was talking about, is so important right now. But like, what kind of specific actions do you even recommend to start to, really on what fronts to do activist work at this moment to address some of the things you're talking about? I mean, it feels so overwhelming, which obviously is, you've been feeling, and your people have been feeling forever. So
yeah. Well, to start with national parks, there's a great book people can read. It's by Mark David Spence. It's called Dispossessing the Wilderness, Indian Removal and the Making of National Parks, right? And so he goes through the history of several national parks and like talks about the removal policies and the militias that had to go kill Native people so they could enclose them to preserve them, right? The first thing is like figuring out whose land you're on, right? Because the one like thing we get in school is that we learn about like Native American, right? That encompasses 570 plus federally recognized tribes. We all have different religions. We all speak different languages. We have different governments. We have different societies, right? Like that's like talking about like, oh, what are we going to do for like all of the Europeans, right? Like that's the kind of like diversity and scale that we're talking about. But I would say generally learning whose land you're on and like what are they fighting right now? Because I bet you $10 there is something that they are trying to get done right now, whether it's preventing like oil from being dumped into their water system, whether it's like preventing a sacred site from being turned into another golf course, right? Like Native peoples throughout the hemisphere are like fighting that fight. The other thing I will say is like land return is happening all the time. Right? We have such a difficult time imagining like what the world looks like after colonialism or after capitalism because we're not taught to imagine that. Right? Dr. Kutcher Risling-Baldy, she's the department chair of Native American Studies at Humboldt State University, and she always tells this story to her students, and I just think it's so accurate and useful. Like everybody knows exactly what they're going to do after the zombie apocalypse. Right? We've had countless movies and novels and we've thought about it, right? We've been given the intellectual space to imagine what we would do in the zombie apocalypse. We are not given that opportunity for like, what does the end of settler colonialism look like, right? There's this episode of The Simpsons, it's like a Game of Thrones episode, right? And they're like, there's this feudal king and Lisa is trying to like lead a revolt with the peasants and Homer comes up to her and she's like, Lisa, what are you doing? Feudalism's the way it's always been. Feudalism's the way it's always going to be, right? What I tell people is that settler colonialism is ecologically unsustainable. It cannot exist in perpetuity, right? And so it's not if settler colonialism will crumble, it will fall, like when empires fall, right? It's like when and whether it's by decision or by force. So I would say educate yourself about the tribe you're currently on, whose land you're currently on, how it became dispossessed from those people, what they are currently fighting against, and then start researching land returns. Like it's happening. Like lands are being returned all the time. Here in Humboldt County, the Wiyot got Tuluwat returned, which is like the center of their ceremonial world, right? That's the first city in the history of the United States to voluntarily return Indian land without a court order or like some sort of like attached, strings attached. So yeah, start with education, and then like we gotta start returning lands, because
and then land back.
Yeah.
Hey, Kaitlin, I was thinking maybe like, everyone thinks about Tokata and her family as like doing, so much work at Standing Rock and being the spokespeople for Standing Rock, but a lot has happened since then. And I was wondering, Tokata, if you could kind of talk about some of that, and also maybe even talk about Peshla, because this is a different way that.
Yeah. I mean, so when I was like 8 years old, my mom actually started this like Indiegogo account, which was it just like crowdfunding. And they ended up raising through that platform, my mother and my father, who Chase Ironize and Sarah Jumping Eagle. Basically, they started this initiative to buy back the sacred site called Peshla. And we ended up raising like over $1 million from crowdfunding, and also several tribes came together to pool some of their money to buy it, and now they're raising buffalo on it. And it's this huge spot of Peshla actually means like bald. It's like a bald spot, but it's this sacred site where there are no trees growing right in the middle of a national forest. And some little old white woman was just living there by herself, and she owned all of this land, which was an actual sacred site. Like it would be the equivalent of somebody like, living in like the Notre Dame and just like being like, actually this is closed and none of you can come and worship. But so we bought it back, and now it's ours, and she still lives there. But yeah, so that was the initiative that sort of I think is when my parents became especially adamant on making sure that I knew my own history, because I was going to school like primary school. I was going to all of these for my elementary school, I actually went to this place called Custer Elementary, which and yeah, it's really crazy. So like I was living two polar like opposite existences by the time I was like 5 all the way to 11, and then I moved to a reservation. So I moved to Standing Rock, and that's when I was 11 is when the pipeline project was proposed. Yeah, so then immediately, my family caring about our water became involved, right? And my dad was always telling me, like, ever since I was young, he's just like, you have so much potential, you have to do something with it. And then middle school me decided to take part in this social media campaign called Respect Our Water to get the word out about it. And that's kind of how I started. And then, as I got older and I just started educating myself more, I became like aware, right, of the global climate crisis and how directly, right, the industries that were so terrifyingly impacting my own community and had been harassing us for millennia, right, or not millennia, but a long time. Yeah, long time. Right. These are the same people. It's the same industries, the same corporations causing this global crisis. And now I'm luckily in a school where I'm getting to learn more and more about, right, the more intricate parts of these very grand ideas.
Talk about like the actions you just did.
Yeah, so I just helped. It was actually this group of young Indigenous women from Pine Ridge decided to organize a rally on the 4th of July this year. And they asked for my help in planning it, and we ended up actually shutting down the highway.
I watched that live.
Yeah. Yeah.
leading up to when who was
Yes.
speaking
So
about
Donald
Mount
Trump
Rushmore?
was attending this fireworks show at Mount Rushmore, which is everyone knows, right? It's the four heads on this big mountain in the Black Hills. Well, what no one talks about is that that is also a sacred site. It's called Tunkashila Shakbe, and which means the six grandfathers, and it's this beautiful mountainside. And if you would just look at the other side of the mountain, you would see how grand it is. It's like these rock cathedrals, and on the other side of this mountain, there's just this weird bald spot of rock with four white people's faces on it. So it's a very it's very deliberate in the places that we're living, and I think it's such I think, you know, it really points to the future that is Indigenous young people, because children are just like inherently little sponges. And for me, I always remember like when I was growing up, you know, both in these border towns and these, you know, like 80% white communities, where I was always like, you know, one of the singular brown people in the spaces that I was in. It really showed me the disparities in the realities that we were living. Like, people got normal childhoods, people, you know, versus what I was doing was advocacy for an entire community. Like worrying about whether or not my people were going to have clean water versus somebody, I don't know, like going to soccer practice. So it really just, and now that's why I think it feels very good for me to explore these things in educational spaces, because it's a dissecting of an experience that I was already having and could never put a name to it. And it's something, right, that awareness and that education is something that young Indigenous people are going to start having more and more access to. And people don't understand that once that happens, and already, right, with the desperate need for Indigenous leadership in these political spaces, right, we need the young people, and we need Indigenous young people to be the living legacies of, you know, ancestral teachings, and it's going to be completely in their hands, I think.
The thing I say about like settler colonialism, because like it's no wonder like we're all like depressed and have anxiety. Like, we're not supposed to like live in this way, right? Like, the world is not private property. But like what I tell people is like that can be really like frustrating and overwhelming, but like settler colonialism is always being reproduced, right? That means it's never actually complete. Like, Native peoples haven't been eliminated, right? Like, yeah, they made it like almost all of the way there, but like they failed. You know, like we're still here. And so like I'm like young and not patient, and like I want to see it collapse now, but like it's crumbling. Like, we're watching it crumble, and like some people that might make them upset, but like I'm like, get my popcorn.
But the reality of it is that the more and more that you learn about the state that we're in, the more you learn that almost everything about it is completely irrelevant to our existence, especially Indigenous people. It's like, oh, we were right, we could be, and we were 100% fine, and now there's this big giant colonial invader that's just been sitting on us for the past like 200 years, and you recognize, right, that there is another path, somehow and some way, that we get to be a part of, and that we get to make, and we get to shape what that looks like for us in our individual experiences. But those things cannot be possible in the way that we're living right now.
Right. To go back to Standing Rock, the way I open up my book is, so one of my good friends is, her name's Jessa Ray Growing Thunder. She's Lakota, Nakota, and her people are on the Fort Peck Reservation in Montana. Anyway, she was telling me the Black Snake story, which for people who don't know, right, there's this like black snake that would come through the territory and it would just like destroy everything in its path. And she was telling me that about Standing Rock. And I was like, holy shit, I have black snakes in my homeland. Because like when people are growing cannabis and like they suck all the water out of our rivers, right? They have these little polyethylene black tubes that run all up and down the mountains and like steal water, right? And so like I was thinking about kind of the ways in which all of our peoples have like these similar environmental issues that we're dealing with, but like all of us like are in it for the long haul. Like we're not gonna give up because like the court bill gets too high. Like we're gonna sit in the middle and like not let them do it. You know what I mean? And so that thread of resistance and like resilience and like revitalization, like how frigging cool is it that like settlers have been here for centuries and people are still speaking their languages and we're still going to our ceremonies. Like
we are legitimately a population of wizards. And this I don't understand. Like compared to the like as of right now, right? We are specifically set up to be the most magical of solutions for all of the settlers' problems. It's very, very visible and obvious. And it's just that no one's deciding to pay attention yet.
Yeah.
There's a question I'd love to pose to Dr. Reed and to Toka, which goes back to what you were just saying, Toka, in a way, but also what Dr. Reed was saying about the misinformation that starts so early in American education. Are there some meaningful initiatives or advocacy going on to change textbooks that you know of that would be good for folks to look into?
Well, I know Trump is talking about the pro-American curriculum task force. So opposite direction. There's been talk about getting the Mission Project out of California schools for a really long time. Because they're essentially asking children to like construct a concentration camp. I get asked to review like textbooks and stuff, and I just got sent one like a couple months ago for like a middle school social studies class about the gold rush, and oh god, it's still like they can't get out of the tropes of like miners were individual brave heroes, right? What I tell people is, because people tell me, they're like, Kaitlin, we can't tell young children about violence, right? That is not true, because I ask all of my students to raise their hand who read The Diary of Anne Frank, right? Who read Night, right? It is not as if we don't want to teach children about violence. We teach them about violence where the US gets to be the hero of that narrative, right? Like we stormed the beaches of Normandy, right? Like, yeah, we're going to teach them about the Holocaust. We saved the day, right? And it's geographically distanced, right? Like there is no solution to like the Native American genocide. The state of California emerged from it, you know, like, and then we still have you say the Pledge of Allegiance. So I think at a fundamental level, the function of a public school system in a settler state is to reproduce populations of settlers, right? And so like you can make some tweaks, but like what we're really talking about is the fundamental mission of that educational institution.
Being in Northern California right now and knowing about Green Diamond, have you done any research? Because I feel like one of the evilest things right now is greenwashing. Can you talk at all about that, or do you have an opinion on that at all?
Can you I've heard like green grabbing. I'm not sure if green washing is referring to the same thing. Can you explain a little bit?
So like when you go to Green Diamond's website, they like present themselves as environmentally friendly companies. Used to be these timber companies were just like, we own this timber, we're taking it down. Now they're like, oh, we're so good to the environment and we make environmentally friendly products that we can sell you for so much money. When in fact, they're clear cutting. They're doing the same thing, but they're just like what people are calling greenwashing. So I was wondering.
Yeah. I'll leave you guys with an argument that's made by Deborah McGregor that I absolutely love. She's an Anishinaabe scholar and she thinks about indigenous environmental justice. And she critiques this concept of sustainable development because she argues like this is a thoroughly Western concept where you're still thinking about the landscape as natural resources that exist for material gain, but you're trying to extend the shelf life of how long you can continue to exploit, right? And so she essentially argues like sustainable development is so that we can keep doing capitalism longer, right? So there's like actually like this like idea of sustainable development, it's a real like misnomer, because what we actually need is to completely reframe and reconceptualize the way we interact with our landscape, right? And like nobody friggin' knows how to feed themselves.
Right.
Like we're all useless. Like once our supply chains get cut, like, which is gonna happen, right? Like nobody knows like what to do, right? And so I make the thinking about education, right? The reason we sit at a desk for 8 hours locked in a room is so that like we can get kids primed to like work in factories, work 9 to 5s. Like what we actually need is to reconceptualize education, and it should probably be happening outside, right? Like I don't use trigonometry ever, but I'd really love it if I learned the difference between like wild grasses that I can use for shit and like things that I can't eat. Like that nobody ever taught me that in K through 12, right? So I will say sustainable development's not real.
Well, I know this is a conversation that we could keep going on and on with. It's amazing material. And Dr. Reed, obviously you've put so much thought into conceptualizing this in Toka. It's so great to hear your thoughts as the next generation pushing these ideas forward. So we really thank you for this and for being here. There have been some questions about how this is being recorded, and of course it is, and it can be found on the MCA's Facebook page. So we can all go back and listen to this and digest some of these thoughts even more. But thanks to Andrea, to Toka, to Dr. Reed for being here today, really opening our eyes to these issues. And obviously there's so much work to be done. So thank you for everything you're bringing to these issues.
Thanks to you and Connie.
Thank you.
And thanks for everyone for listening, and have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.
Lovely to meet you, Toka.
Bye.
We gotta talk again.
We do. We must. We must. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.